What if I told you that the breakdown you're experiencing right now might actually be your breakthrough trying to emerge? I know that sounds almost impossible when you're in the middle of it. When you're lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering if you've lost your mind. When you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back. Trust me, I get it. 3 years ago, I lost my marriage, my career, and my father within 18 months. I thought I was having the world's most expensive midlife crisis. Turns out I was having what mystics call a spiritual awakening, and nobody warned me it would feel like dying. Here's the shocking truth that changed everything for me. Spiritual awakening has a 90% failure rate, but not because people aren't capable of transformation. It's because no one prepared them for what this journey actually looks like. If you've ever felt like your entire world is collapsing, if you're supporting someone who seems to be having an identity crisis that looks like madness, or if you're just wondering why some people emerge from life's storms completely transformed while others stay stuck, this video might literally save your sanity. I'm going to give you the roadmap I wish I'd had, the one that turns spiritual crisis into spiritual breakthrough. Plus, I'll share the 4 practical pillars that will help you not just survive this process, but use it to create the most authentic life you've ever lived. If you're ready to understand what's really happening when everything falls apart, hit that subscribe button and let's explore this together. Now, understanding that 90% failure rate becomes crucial when you realize what happened to Sarah, someone who called me in the middle of this exact process. She reached out at 2 a.m. last month, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "James," she whispered, "I think I'm losing my mind. Everything I used to care about feels fake. My marriage feels like I'm acting in a play. My job feels meaningless. I can't sleep, can't eat. What's wrong with me?" I recognized her voice immediately. Not her actual voice, but the voice of someone standing at the threshold between who they used to be and who they're becoming. The same voice I'd heard in my own midnight moments of terror. "Sarah," I said, "you're not losing your mind. You're finding your soul. But nobody told you it would feel like dying first." See, Sarah had fallen for the same beautiful lie our culture sells about spiritual awakening. You know, sitting in perfect lotus position, glowing with inner peace, manifesting abundance while your chakras perfectly align with the universe. That's spiritual marketing, not spiritual reality. And this misconception is exactly why so many people, like Sarah, panic when the real process begins. Real awakening is messier. It's your entire identity dissolving while you're still trying to pay your mortgage. It's crying in your car after yoga class because suddenly nothing makes sense anymore. It's feeling like an alien in your own life. But here's what Sarah didn't know, and what our Instagram spirituality culture has forgotten. The ancient masters saw this coming. The Sufis called it fana, complete dissolution. Christians called it the dark night of the soul. Buddhists describe ego death. Different words, same terrifying and beautiful truth. Sometimes we have to completely fall apart before we can come together as who we really are. And that 90% failure rate I mentioned, it exists precisely because people like Sarah enter this process expecting gentle transformation, not complete metamorphosis. Which brings us to what actually happens when genuine awakening begins. The 3 initiation phases. Through studying ancient wisdom traditions and living this myself, I've mapped exactly what Sarah and millions of others experience. There are 3 distinct phases that every genuine awakening involves, and understanding them is the difference between surviving the process and being destroyed by it. I call them initiations because each one, no matter how challenging, is actually guiding you home to your authentic self. Sarah was deep in the first phase when she called me, which explains why she felt like she was losing her mind. If you're going through any of these right now, you're not broken, you're breaking open, and that's exactly what needs to happen. Phase 1, the identity meltdown. The first phase, what Sarah was experiencing, is what I call the identity meltdown. It's when everything you've used to define yourself suddenly feels empty. Your career title, your relationship status, your personality traits, they all start feeling like costumes you've been wearing without realizing it. I'll never forget my own version of Sarah's mirror moment. I looked at myself after my divorce and thought, who the hell is this guy? The successful consultant, the devoted husband, the guy who had his life figured out, gone. Just gone. What's happening in your brain during this phase is actually fascinating. Your default mode network, basically the neural pathways that maintain your sense of being a separate self, starts to quiet down. You're not losing your mind. Your mind is releasing a version of you that was always partially constructed anyway. If you've ever looked in the mirror and thought, I don't know who I am anymore, drop a heart in the comments. Let's normalize this experience because it's way more common than people talk about. About 60% of people panic at this point and desperately try to reconstruct their old identity. But here's the thing. Once you've seen behind the mask, you can't unsee it. The only way out is through, which leads us directly into the second phase, where things get even more intense. Phase 2, the emotional purge, 3:45 to 5. If you make it through the identity dissolution, if you resist the urge to run back to who you used to be, you hit what I call the emotional purge. This is where many people think they're having a complete breakdown, when actually they're having a breakthrough. It's when every feeling you've been stuffing down for decades suddenly demands to be felt. And I mean everything. Grief from losses you thought you'd processed, anger about injustices you'd forgotten, fear about futures you've never even considered. I'm talking about crying for no apparent reason, getting angry at things that never bothered you before, feeling grief about losses from years ago. It's like your emotional system finally feels safe enough to process everything you couldn't handle when it first happened. Think of it like your computer doing a massive system update. Everything slows down, weird stuff happens, but it's actually installing better software. Your psyche is doing the same thing, upgrading your emotional operating system. If you're in this emotional storm right now, type waves in the comments. Sometimes just knowing others have survived this helps you keep breathing through it. Another 25% of people get stuck here because the intensity feels unbearable. But those who make it through discover something profound. Once you've felt everything you've been avoiding, you're finally free to feel what's actually true in the present moment, which prepares you for the third phase, arguably the most challenging of all. Phase 3, the relationship shift. The third phase emerges naturally from the first two, when your expanding awareness creates distance between you and the people around you. I call it the relationship shift, and it's often the loneliest part of the entire journey. After you've been through identity dissolution and emotional purging, something shifts in how you perceive the world. Suddenly, small talk feels excruciating. Office politics seem ridiculous. That friend who only talks about shopping and celebrities starts feeling like they're speaking a foreign language. I lost several friendships during my awakening, not through drama, but through incompatibility. We simply couldn't connect anymore. My marriage ended partly because I became someone my wife didn't recognize. The person she'd married had genuinely disappeared. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't about becoming superior to others. It's more like, imagine if you suddenly could see ultraviolet light while everyone else saw only the regular spectrum. You're not better or worse. You're just perceiving differently. If you've felt this kind of relationship shift, type bridge below. Let's create connection right here among people who understand this territory. This isolation phase breaks the final 10 to 15% who made it this far. The loneliness becomes too much, and they convince themselves that awakening is just sophisticated self-destruction. But here's what I discovered after studying why so many people surrender at this point. Why most people give up. Understanding why 9 out of 10 people never complete this journey became my obsession after watching so many friends, people with genuine spiritual experiences, turn back to unconsciousness rather than push through to integration. After walking this path and studying it extensively, I found 3 main reasons, and understanding them is literally half the battle for survival. Reason 1, nobody prepared us for spiritual boot camp. The first reason ties directly back to that Instagram spirituality myth I mentioned earlier. We expect spiritual growth to feel like a gentle yoga class, not like emotional boot camp. Our culture has taught us that change should be comfortable, gradual, Instagram-worthy. But every wisdom tradition tells the same story those ancient masters knew. Real transformation isn't gentle. It's intense because it has to be. You can't renovate a house while living in it comfortably. Something has to be torn down first. When the real process hits, messy, demanding, inconvenient, we think something's wrong. This is exactly what happened to me during my identity meltdown. I kept waiting for the spiritual part to feel peaceful, not realizing that intensity isn't the bug, it's the feature. Reason 2, we're trying to do it alone. The second reason builds on that isolation we feel during the relationship shift. We're attempting this massive internal renovation while maintaining full-time jobs, family responsibilities, and social appearances. It's like trying to perform surgery on yourself while teaching a college course. Traditional cultures had elders who understood this process, communities that supported you through the dissolution phase, rituals that honored the death and rebirth of identity. Sarah, when she called me at 2 a.m., was desperately seeking what every traditional culture provided automatically. We get Google and hopefully a good therapist if we're lucky. Reason 3, the escape hatch always looks tempting. The third reason is the most human. When things get intense during any of those 3 phases, there's always an escape hatch. Netflix binges, shopping therapy, work obsession, relationship drama, anything to stop the uncomfortable feelings. I spent months trying to rebuild my old life exactly as it was. Applied for identical jobs, tried to win back my ex-wife, desperately wanted proof I could return to normal. I was running straight back toward the identity I'd just watched dissolve. But here's what changed everything for me, and what leads us to the solution that can transform this entire process. I stopped asking, how do I make this stop? And started asking, what is this trying to teach me? That shift from resistance to curiosity, that's where the real magic begins. The 4 survival strategies, that single question, what is this trying to teach me, opened the door to what I now call the 4 survival strategies. These aren't just theory, they're what actually carried me through the darkness and into the most peaceful period of my life. More importantly, they're what I shared with Sarah during her 2 a.m. crisis call, and what transformed her breakdown into the breakthrough she's experiencing today. Strategy 1, intelligent surrender. The first strategy grows directly from that shift I just mentioned, what I call intelligent surrender. It's not giving up, but giving into a process that's clearly smarter than your attempts to control it. Instead of fighting the identity dissolution, the emotional purge, or the relationship shifts, you learn to work with them. Every morning I started with this phrase, I don't understand what's happening, but I trust it's serving my growth. Try saying that phrase right now. Notice what happens in your body. If it brings up resistance, that's just the old pattern protecting itself. Drop trust in the comments if you're willing to experiment with this. This single shift from why me to what now transforms victim into student, crisis into curriculum. But surrender alone isn't enough. You also need to change how you treat yourself during this process. Strategy 2, radical self-compassion. Strategy 2 emerged when I realized I was treating myself worse during my awakening than I'd treat a stranger going through trauma. I call it radical self-compassion, treating yourself like you would your own child experiencing something overwhelming. Remember, during identity dissolution, emotional purging, and relationship shifts, you're essentially watching yourself die and be reborn. That deserves compassion, not criticism. Instead of the inner critic saying, you should be stronger, you learn to say, hey, this is really hard. You're doing your best. It's okay to be confused. The same gentleness you'd offer someone in a hospital. Self-compassion isn't weakness. It's the fuel that transforms breakdown into breakthrough. You can't hate yourself into healing. But even with surrender and self-compassion, you still need support from others who understand. Strategy 3, find your tribe strategy. 3 addresses that relationship shift isolation directly. You must find even one person who can look at your experience and say, yes, I know this territory. You're not crazy, you're going to be okay. Finding my support group literally saved my sanity. Hearing others share similar experiences helped me realize this journey is more common than we think. Sarah found her tribe through our conversation and a community I connected her with. This might be a therapist who understands spiritual emergence, a meditation teacher who's walked this path, or an online community of fellow travelers. Let's start building that tribe right here. Share where you are in your journey with one word: dissolving, emerging, integrating, curious, whatever feels true. But here's what I learned about community and support. It works best when you understand that this process isn't a one-time event. Your next steps. Because you've stayed with me through this entire exploration, I know you're not like most people. You're someone who chooses truth over comfort, growth over stagnation. So let me speak directly to your specific situation. If you're in the thick of it right now, experiencing that identity meltdown Sarah described, drowning in emotional waves, or feeling isolated from everyone around you, please hear this. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're undergoing one of the most profound transformations available to human consciousness. Use those 4 strategies we explored. Surrender to the process, treat yourself with radical compassion, find your people, and remember this is a long game, not a quick fix. What feels like destruction is reconstruction happening in real time. If you're supporting someone through this, watching your partner, child, or friend go through what looks like the relationship shift phase or identity dissolution, your job isn't to fix them or rush them back to normal. Remember what we learned about those 3 phases. They're necessary initiations, not breakdowns to be cured. Hold space, listen, trust their process even when it scares you. Use the understanding we built here to see their crisis as sacred transformation. If you're curious but haven't experienced this yet, if you're wondering about that 10% who complete the journey, understand that awakening can't be forced. It happens when the soul is ready, but you can prepare by practicing presence, developing emotional intelligence, and cultivating the courage to question your assumptions. Whatever brought you here, you're not alone in this grand adventure of consciousness. You're part of that small percentage willing to do the deep work Sarah's doing, that I've done, that every awakened being throughout history has navigated. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes knowing we're not the only one going through this is the medicine that transforms crisis into breakthrough. If you want to continue exploring these territories with practical wisdom and ancient insights, subscribe to Soul Inner. We're building a community of people committed to authentic transformation, not just spiritual entertainment. Before you go, I'm curious. In the comments below, share just one word that captures where you are right now in your journey. Let's create a living map of consciousness, a constellation of souls supporting each other through the most challenging and beautiful work we can do as human beings.